Hey everybody, Tony D and Little Joan here with a screenwriter's rant on Dear Evan Hansen. A new movie, not sure if it's a musical. It might be a musical. But it's an insanely long trailer at 3 minutes. Joan, don't ruin this take. And it's about a kid in high school named Evan Hansen who's having problems, so his therapist tells him to write letters to himself. And then one day he meets some kid in school named Connor who writes his name on his cast. And later Connor steals one of his letters that he's supposed to be writing to his therapist. And then Connor, and this is a big spoiler. I don't know why they would put this in the trailer, but I guess that's the whole movie. What? Here, come over here. You're distracting me. So Connor kills himself. But he kills himself and he has the letter. And the letter is written by Evan. These are Connor's parents, played by Amy Adams and this dude. They have the letter, and they think Connor wrote it to him, and they think Connor was great friends with this kid. And it kind of spirals out of control from there. And he becomes the only connection the grieving family has with Connor. And so he sort of gets sucked into being Connor's friend, even though he barely knew him. He only had like a couple of conversations with the guy. And so he ends up giving his eulogy, and then because of all this, and he makes a video where he gives a eulogy, and he begins to sing in the trailer, so I guess it's a musical. And then his heartfelt eulogy, I guess, which is kind of fake, goes viral, and it helps the family, and I think he dates his sister, Connor's sister, but ultimately they figure out, that it was all fake, and he's made things worse. And I don't know if the sister kills herself too, because there's a scene of her driving a car, and Julianne Moore is his mom, and he's depressed, and everybody's depressed, and it's about a bunch of screwed up kids in high school. And it's very drama oriented. It feels very contrived to me. That is what I'll say about it. It feels very contrived. It's not a contrivance that people in high school, teenagers think about suicide. It's a very stressful time. It was very stressful for me. I hated high school. But this constant Hollywood exploitation of it is really kind of, its own way, it kind of pisses me off, because they're constantly doing these over the top dramas where everything's on the line in high school, like everything. And if you've ever been to a damn high school, and most people have, you remember it as it actually is. Yeah, there's that intensity there, but it's also true that there's a lot of things that aren't intense in high school, like schoolwork, especially senior year, when you graduate and the whole thing is just an absolute joke. I guess this speaks to high schoolers, but as always, it feels like this is older people preaching down to teenagers without real knowledge of what those teenagers are going through. And this has been a pattern in entertainment for a long time. It was certainly a pattern when I was in high school. And when I was in high school, I was trying to write this kind of stuff, and I would see the stuff that was aimed at me, but it was obvious then that this was like some 40-year-old middle-aged person trying to write to me. But really, they were writing about their own experiences, 10 years prior or 20 years prior, back in the 60s and 70s. So that's kind of what I feel like this is. It feels a little bit like they're not writing to me. Well, they're certainly not writing to me, because I'm not the audience, but it feels like people slightly younger than me, I would imagine. They could be about as old, writing about like the 90s, And there's nothing wrong with that, but there's something missing from it. There's something not as genuine about it, because they're so caught up in the drama that they remember. They don't bother to see if that drama still holds true today. The drama that happened in the 80s, for instance. So, like, I went to high school in the 80s. I graduated in 84. So at that time, the drama, and I put that in quotes because it was high school drama, but for me it was, you had like the jocks and the party kids running the school, and kids in my sort of era, a certain stripe, and it's not even the whole school, but this is just my personal experience. Were like the prototype sort of grunge kids, the ones that were sick of everything, and then by the time 5 or 6 years down the road, and you hit the early '90s, that became the cool thing to do, right? It was rebellious kind of when I did it, but by the time the '90s roll around, then everybody was doing it, and then it was all screwed up, and then I don't even know what. I guess you would say being super pro-American was the cool thing, because then you had the kids coming up who would, go into the 2000s, and they were all, hey, America again. So it goes through all these like cycles and patterns of people with different attitudes. And a lot of times it's, you've got the kids who are doing the popular thing, and then the minority of kids who are rebelling against that. They're rebelling against a lot of things, but they're rebelling against that. So now what do we have now? So we have the woke, running the show, and everybody's super woke and they can't virtue signal enough these days. Well, you can imagine who the rebels are in school now. They're traditionalists. They're people who are maybe not waving the American flag, although some of them are definitely patriotic, but like people who are like being more anti-woke, being like, F this. This is BS. And but who's driving the train in this movie? It's the woke. It's the older crowd. It's the popular crowd, because that tends to be, in my view, what Hollywood always goes for. Oh, this is cool. Everybody on Twitter likes it. Therefore, we'll make $1 million. Will they? I don't know. It feels the whole thing feels just manipulative. So, dear Evan Hansen, go away would be my response.